Hi guys, welcome to the Kart Show Live. It's episode 4 with me, Alan Taddei from TDI Media, and I'm joined by Ken Potter, the MSA Clerk of the course for Super 1 and club meetings around the country as well. Now I should start by saying, I have to apologise a little bit. You might think I sound a little bit weird. I had an operation on the top of my mouth on Monday. I've been feeling a little bit under the weather, but didn't want to let everybody down, and I knew Ken was coming. So we're just going to struggle through as best we can. I'm not sure how long I'll be able to go on for, because I am in a little bit of pain. But anyway, thanks for coming. Appreciate
Thanks for the invite.
Appreciate your time. I'm going to call you the Battenberg Clerk. We'll talk about that in a little while and why that's the case, because of what happened at Buckmore Park last year. Because we've seen, I love that flag. You hardly ever see it, but then since it was used at Buckmore Park in Super 1, we've seen a lot more use of it since then. Going to kick off though by asking a question from Sean Finch, although I should ask you this question first, a one-word question, which is, Ken Potter, Clerk of the course, why? Why'd you do it? Why'd you put up with all the abuse?
Believe it or not, I actually enjoy it, Alan. I started at Three Sisters with Manchester and Buxton.
Yep.
Andy, my son, had raced. We'd done a couple of years of Super 1. Sue, my wife, and myself got a lot of friends. A lot of our social life was around motorsport and karting. So as our Andrew got to the latter stages and we discussed and thought he'll finish one day, we decided to put something back in. Sue started marshalling and works as a marshal, and I was asked by Manchester and Buxton if I would actually train as a clerk, which I agreed to do, and been doing that since.
Yeah, and I've known you since then, of course, because I was racing at Manchester and Buxton with my son.
Yep.
I think our kids only raced the 1 year in the same class. I think the junior Rotats when they raced together. I think Andy was in junior TKM intermediate.
He was,
for a large part of the time, wasn't he? So I know you from then. So it's interesting that, you know, there's I suppose if you look at the number of people in karting and the number of people that don't go on to get involved as either, whether it be marshals or clerks, it's always quite interesting to me to understand why people actually do it, because it's one of those jobs, I think it's fair to say, that it can be a difficult job to do. You're not always appreciated, that's fair to say.
No, it can be very trying, but I get the buzz and the adrenaline rush out of making things happen, out of running a meeting, starting on time, running the races and finishing on time and dealing with the event. So I do get a buzz out of it, and I still thoroughly enjoy it.
Okay, I'm going to start, by the way, if you want to ask a question, guys, make sure you put your questions in the box below, so we can pick those questions up here live. I'm going to start off by asking a question from Sean Finch, who sent me a question on Facebook yesterday. Sean was saying that the new OTK, there's an issue apparently with the new OTK karts, with the clearance being 27mm, close to the 27mm limit. And he was saying, you know, how is that going to be dealt with? Is there going to be some common sense?
I'm sure there'll be common sense. I mean, quite often in cases like this, it's the teams, it's the drivers who pick up on the issue first when they start to assemble and test the karts. So learning about the issue was fairly new to me, but I spoke with a senior technical advisor yesterday once I'd heard about the issue, and hopefully the scrutineers, the eligibility judges of facts will use a common sense approach, and I'm sure it'll be okay.
But we don't always see common sense approaches, of course. Is that going to be a case of you, pre the race meeting, having a meeting with the scrutineers and saying, you know, let's be sensible about this? Because how much leeway do you have if they report a non-compliance? Do you have any leeway at all? If they come back and say, well, look, there's one here, it's 26mm, do you have any leeway to say, I'm not going to take any further action on that?
No, that's a fair point. The conversation is far better to have before the issue's raised, before a scrutineer does paperwork, because as you rightly say, once the paperwork's completed, once it comes into the office, then as a clerk of the course, we have virtually no leeway other than to issue a penalty. Where we actually know of an issue like this one before an event, then it does allow us to have a conversation with the eligibility scrutineer and hopefully sort it out before it gets to doing paperwork. Unfortunately, through a season, you're right, you do occasionally see something where it looks like common sense might not have prevailed at the time.
Okay. What would you say, from your point of view, being a clerk, what are the sort of big issues facing you at the moment, do you think?
Well, I think the biggest issues for drivers really, which comes across then to clerks, is a consistency. We do have a set of rules, we do have mandatory penalties, but drivers, teams, they want to see these penalties applied consistently and fairly at every track in every championship.
Okay. Don't forget, guys, if you want to ask a question, post your questions below so we can pick those up, because that is what drives the content forward. Super One, you've been with Super One now for
5 years.
5 years. That's, it doesn't seem like you've been around for long, but I want to talk about the what we call the Battenberg incident then, which happened at Botwell Park last year. And since this incident, I've been seeing a lot more use of the Battenberg flags. It's one of my favourite flags in karting. I think all too often we see a red flag come out when a Battenberg would certainly do. We've got the clip lined up. I think we're gonna show it now on the screen here in front of us. This is the incident. Harry Thompson leading, Bray Keneally behind. Now Bray does get a little bit of a shove from behind. Johnny Wilkinson takes advantage. That's a good piece of driving by Johnny, by the way. Now Bray getting out there, it's a little bit dangerous in that situation as he gets out, but he gets back in. Here's the replay, slow motion, on board with Bray Keneally. Now you don't see the little shove that Bray gets from behind. It's very slight, but it's enough just to push him into Harry. The two of them come to a halt. Now, what is going on at this point? Because I think Martin Bean, as we'll see, is on the scene very quickly, and they're reporting to you?
They are. Well, I'm in conversation with Martin. The carts have already now gone past the incident for the first time, and we decide then what we're going to do. The bringing out of the Battenberg flag is a bit like on a circuit race, the release of the safety car.
Yeah.
What we do is we actually neutralise the racing by the poleman becoming the pace setter, as you can see there on screen.
Yeah.
Doing
Now,
an absolutely
and the interesting
wonderful
thing
job.
here is you don't see Harry Thompson there, because there he is. He's been pulled off to the side by Martin Bean.
He has, and as you can see, Martin's in communication with myself. And if I remember rightly, the checkered flag came out on the next lap. So there was one pass under the Battenberg and then checkered flag.
Okay. So you see Martin was, speaking to Harry there. He made a decision that...
He was quite happy, Martin, that he was safe. He was quite happy that the driver... And then as the clerk running the circuit, I decided to finish the race under Battenberg flag for the next lap.
And I did say at the time, Dan Hazelwood, when I interviewed Dan about it, he did say that Harry was injured. And I can't dispute that because I don't know. But what I would say is that the history of the sport is certainly, and this changed slightly, and then apparently they've changed it back. Usually lap 1, lap 2, if you were the poleman and got punted off on lap 1, you'd feign injury, get the red flag to come out, and you'd take your pole position back. That used to happen a lot. Now, the MSA brought in a rule to try and stop that happening, and basically if you're not running when the red flag comes out, then you don't get to take part in the restart. That was the rule, but they've... talking to you earlier, they've changed that rule back now.
Yes, I mean, if you were actually involved in the incident, so in that case, Harry and Bray, if we would have actually then brought the red flag out, in fact, at that stage, because of the 75% rule, it would have been a result.
The end of the race.
But let's say we'd run more than 25%, then they would have been allowed providing that the chief scrutineer is happy that the kart's okay to continue, and providing that the medical team, the medical officer, is happy the driver's okay to continue, then they can actually restart in the race, albeit from the back, but they can restart in the race.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, quite an interesting incident that, because it did lead to a lot more use, I think, of the Battenberg flag. Throughout the year, I saw it at different club meetings, and it's not a flag that I think I'd seen for 2 or 3 years before that. So I think you've single-handedly brought back probably the best flag.
Well, I've seen it used, and as I say, it's purely to neutralise the race. If you've got a marshal working on the side of a track, unfortunately, so often we see as clerks that you put the yellow flag out, drivers don't respond, they don't slow down. With a Battenberg flag, there's more chance that they will slow down. Yeah. You neutralise it and you make it safe for the driver who might be being removed from the kart, and you're making it safe for the marshal who might be putting the kart into a safe place. If you can deal with it under Battenberg, great, you carry on and finish the race. If you decide that you do need to bring a red flag out, in that case, you'd just call the red flag and you'd stop the race.
And how much does the timing of the meeting perhaps influence these decisions? If you knew that the meeting was running late and another red, I mean, sometimes we've seen 5, 6 red flags during a meeting, and the things, you know, you're adding an hour to the day, and then all of a sudden you're running close to maybe the 6 o'clock shut-off time limit. How might that influence your decision to bring a Battenberg rather than a red flag?
I would like to think it wouldn't, because if we decide to once a race is run 25% as a clerk, I can actually call for a red flag and send the karts in and call that a result. Right. A lot of people think it's 75%. Yeah. You can actually call a result at 25%.
That would be rare though, wouldn't it?
It would be rare, and what you normally do if you red flag it, you would normally either do a full restart or you'd restart in single file, going back to the last full lap completed by the leader.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about there's some new rules this year. Just talk a little bit about those.
Well, there are some changes to the rules. Last year and previous years, we've had, for example, undertaking under a yellow flag during the race. So you pass somebody during the race under yellow flag conditions, it was an automatic exclusion. That's now been reduced to a 1 lap penalty. Probably still put you towards the back, but at least you are getting now a race finish. Black flag, for example, if you actually ignore the black flag more than once, then it used to be automatically that you would be sent home. Now you've got the option to exclude the driver from the race, but let him continue in the meeting. Another one that's actually changed for a C115 that's driving in a manner incompatible with general safety and that of a competent driver, you can now give a 1 lap penalty as well as still having the option to exclude from the race.
Okay, let's just pick up some, if I put my glasses on would help, I can actually read the questions. Another question came in yesterday. Somebody was talking about, I think it was PF International last week. I think you were at this meeting.
Yes, I was there.
And they were talking about effing and blinding, and he had his 10-year-old daughter with him, and she heard everything. And I think you were the other side of the bridge. I think you said you heard everything as well. And he was saying that, you know, as far as he's concerned, you know, it's not the sort of thing you want to hear, which you don't around children.
Absolutely.
He was talking about, you know, ban these people for 12 months. You'd have to be doing something pretty serious to get banned by the MSA for 12 months. It hardly ever happens. We've seen people circumventing the rules specifically with trying to gain an advantage and only got a 9-month ban. So getting a 12-month ban is going to be rare, even if they're sort of, you know, swearing and effing and blinding. But that is something. Now, on that occasion, they were saying about you know, should get banned, but just what happened there? Because you did deal with it, didn't you?
Well, if it's the same incident, as you say, I was at the opposite side of the bridge from the incident. I heard someone shouting using abusive language. Wasn't quite sure who he was shouting at the time, but it was extremely loud, extremely clear, and anybody in the vicinity would have heard it. So I crossed the bridge as soon as it was safe, approached the person who explained it was his son that he was talking to. Now at that point, because we're running the CIK trial at PF, then as a clerk of the course, I requested to him that he reported to the stewards of the meeting. That would then be dealt with by the stewards. I went in and reported very clear to the stewards what I'd heard, what I'd seen, and made them aware that I'd asked the parent to report to the stewards. His first comment wasn't particularly clever, he said no. But I then spoke to his team manager and the mechanic of the driver and said, look, you really need to get him up to see the stewards.
Okay, so that was dealt with at least anyway. How much, we've seen various examples of it in the past, of people going on at their kids, it borders on child abuse sometimes. I mean, I wasn't there at there was an incident at Glannygorse Park years ago, and my friend got involved in it because somebody was caught punching his son, and got told by the circuit owner, I think, if he does anything like that again, then he wouldn't be allowed back to the circuit. Personally, I just would have stopped him coming anyway. But it is a bit of an issue, isn't it, that, you know, sometimes it's almost like the parents are involved in the sport because they want to be involved in it and they're living their life through their kids.
Of course, that can be an issue. I mean, having run my son Andy in racing, I know as a parent that you can get frustrated and adrenaline does go and you can have words at the end. But yeah, we've got to see a control. If it's reported, if it's seen, then I'd like to believe that it's actually dealt with. Unfortunately, quite a lot of it isn't reported, and sometimes you can understand to a degree people don't want to get involved.
Yeah, yeah. The running of meetings, I'm not sure how to put this really. If you look at Super 1, for example, John Hoyle puts a huge amount of effort into the promotion of the series. I know it's difficult for people to understand that don't know John, but I do know him very well. I've known him for years. He cares passionately about people having a good time, and he cares about putting on what he calls a show.
Yep.
Now, when the meeting starts, he has to hand over basically his business to the likes of yourself and other MSA officials who have to run that meeting. And he has, how much influence does he have? And obviously, I'm assuming he recruits the clerks, isn't he? So
it's the same as any club. A clerk of the course is invited by the club. So in this case, the clerk of the course is invited by John. I would like to think as a clerk he has no influence whatsoever over the decisions that I make. And to be fair to John, although he is passionate, although sometimes he does get a little bit involved, I can never think in the 5 years I've been involved where he's tried to get me to change a decision or influence a decision at all. And if he did, it wouldn't happen, but he never has.
Yeah, but he does like to represent the drivers. A lot of the time people won't realise that he is in there representing, even from the point of view of just trying to understand what's gone on. Like you say, he's never going to influence a decision once the decision's been made. And we'll talk, and the next thing I want to talk about is the actual penalties and, you know, how they're applied. But he does represent his customers, doesn't he?
Of course he does. And I think that's good. I think that's healthy that he does question, he does ask questions of officials. But John wants the best for the competitors, he wants the best for the sport, and I think as clerks we want exactly the same as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so don't forget guys, if you want to ask a question, I can't see any questions coming in at the moment. Let me just have a look. Doesn't look like we've got any questions coming in at the moment, so maybe you've got no questions at all. You're all happy with the officials?
Absolutely.
What have you got there, Martin?
Well, there's 11
Oh, is there?
comments.
Okay, so just give me one of those, Mark.
You've got the iPad.
Oh, right, okay. I have no comments coming up on here whatsoever. Maybe if I give let me give this to you, and you can work out what's going on, and then we can get to the bottom of some questions. Where should we go? The issue of one thing that people do talk about quite a lot is driving standards observers, and them being what do we call it? They basically, if they see something, it's they're judges of fact.
Yep.
But I've seen on numerous occasions, involving my son on 3 occasions, when the judge of fact said that we were involved in incidents that we weren't. There's another incident that we were involved with and they never saw it, but
Yep.
that can be quite frustrating for people when the judge of fact say they've seen something and it wasn't the case. And the big issue, I guess, with loading at the start of races, that's one of the biggest issues in the sport. And you see this on, you'll see the karting website, for example, people saying, well, they should just see it and deal with it. But I think it's fair to say that I mean, I've known you for a lot of years. If you see something, Alan Bryant, you deal with it. You're never going to shirk that.
Absolutely, but you have to be quite clear on what you've seen. Now, when you get 20, 30, 35 karts coming into a corner, you can clearly see that there might be contact between one kart and another kart. What you have to do, you have to look and find out where it starts, because one driver's being pushed into another,
Yeah.
and what you have to do and what you try and do is pick up where one kart with no kart going in behind him starts to load karts in front. Sometimes you see it, be very honest, more often than not, especially when all the karts are going in on lap 1, you don't see it. You don't see it. It's virtually impossible to see who's actually the start of the loading.
Yeah.
With the new bumpers, I certainly believe at the circuits that I've been in Super 1, it's improved the number of karts that actually do get round the first few corners on the first lap.
I agree. I know John Hoyle wanted to bring them in for cadets last year, was stopped by the MSA for some reason when he had all the brackets to do it during the season. But that's coming in this year for cadets, isn't it? And it's going to be in
I think that'll be interesting, be very interesting. Just to pick up on your point about the driving standards observers, I can't remember in 5 years, apart from stars, anybody using driving standards observers. We certainly don't use them at Super 1, and we certainly never use them at the clubs that I've worked at as driving standards observers, where they are judges of facts.
Right.
Probably one of the big frustrations for a lot of the teams, a lot of the parents, is that quite often they confuse the marshal, who's in the marshal post, as an observer.
Right.
And I'll regularly get people say, well, I'm right near the post, they must have seen it, he or she must have seen it. The marshal in the post is there as a flag marshal.
Yeah.
Their job is to look between the post before theirs and the post after and make sure that they give the correct signals to the driver to maintain safety. That marshal is not there as an observer of the race. However, because a lot of them are experienced in karting, as clerks we do rely that if they see something, they will report it. But that is certainly not their prime job,
Right.
to be race observers.
Okay. Okay, some questions, guys. Finally, I must catch up with technology and how iPads work one day. Ollie Westover, Ken, what's your thoughts on the new CIK age limits? Good, bad, or neutral? What are the new limits?
To be fair, my view is neutral on it. As a clerk of the course, we don't get asked. We're not asked for any input, and I'd almost call that the politics of the karting. Some people will think it's fantastic, some people will think it's terrible. I honestly don't have a view and don't get involved with driving and age limits and weights, etc.
Okay. Rebecca Braham. Hi, Rebecca. Will there be a more common sense approach with regards to drop down bumpers? We talked about this last year, Rissington, when I interviewed you there. Someone spins in front of you on the rolling up lap, so no incident and you're totally blameless, or will the 10-second penalty still apply? Now, last year you clarified this at Rissington and said that it's a 10-second penalty and there's no way of you...
There's no leeway.
Okay, so there's no leeway on that at all.
And as we stand at the minute, unfortunately, there is no leeway. What I would say is that, unfortunately, if we actually said that if you weren't to blame, you could appeal it and not receive a penalty, we would have a queue the length of the paddock of drivers whose drop-down bumper was going to try and explain how it wasn't their fault. So unfortunately, at the minute, it's certainly not ideal from a Clarking point of view, but it's much better than what we had with all the damage and the number of carts coming off on the first lap, on the first few corners. So I think it's a lot better, but I do feel for people when it genuinely is nothing to do with them, but yes, they'll still pick up a penalty.
Okay, so you're saying on the one hand, you're using the word unfortunately, which seems to suggest that you think they should have a right to appeal. On the other hand, you're saying if you do allow that, you're going to be in the office all day long. How many on average are we losing each race? 2 or 3 each race?
I think the amount of bumpers we're seeing has come down. I think linking this back with this 27mm ruling, I've seen karts where there's been contact on the circuit and the contact has been heavy contact. By the way, we've dealt with that as a separate incident, as a driving incident. We don't rely on the bumpers, so that's a separate incident.
So if you see it, you deal with it.
We deal with it.
Yeah.
But I've been amazed that when I've then radioed through to scrutineering and asked them to confirm that the bumper's in, the reply's been the bumper's actually in place.
Right.
And I've heard a few people say, so I do think that some teams, some people, some individuals have found a way, and maybe it is by reducing this gap to help the bumper stay in place. So I can understand how they bring in this new rule in to make sure there's enough room for the bumpers to go back on impact.
Right, okay. Alex Tyler, hi Alex. Interesting change. I can see why they've done that. So if you aren't injured but were involved in the red flag incident, you can still race. After all, with TCAM, it may just be a case of spinning in avoidance. Okay, that's when we were talking earlier about the red flags. But that still stops the faking of the injury to get your good track position back. Simon Spinks, excluded from PFI. Don't know what he means by that. Chris Williams, if my boy doesn't get a top 3, he goes to bed with no food. Do you think I'm too harsh? I encourage and never push. Okay. Again, Simon Spinks. Someone spun, took my nose cone off, second to last lap. He was so frustrated, he kicked it out in Parc Ferme. Okay, Alan, nose cone pound. I'm not sure what Simon's on about here, Simon.
Well, what I think he might be on about is when he's gone back into Parc Ferme, he's saying he's kicked it in frustration. That very well may be seen as an attempt to kick it back into place. In which case, if you are seen after the checkered flag, backing for Parc Ferme, attempting to refit your nose cone into position, it's an exclusion from the meeting and you're going home.
Right, okay.
So,
does that happen to, was it Josh Collins in Super 1 this year?
I think he
got it overturned on appeal.
No, he didn't.
Did it?
No.
Okay.
The appeal was upheld.
Okay. Chris Williams, your thoughts on IKR? This is an interesting question. Not least because we're going to have Nigel Edwards on in a couple of weeks' time. Nigel's the acting chairman of the ABKC, chairman of Trent Valley. Known Nigel a lot of years, got a lot of time for him. they've got this new 5-point plan in place. I would specifically want to ask him about some of those things. One of which is working more closely with IKR. Now, Chris's question is, your thoughts on IKR? Personally, I think it gets people into karting, and if they fancy MSA, I suppose it's not so daunting with all the rules and regulations. I know IKR have their rules and regulations which you have to obey. So what's your view on IKR and the rise of IKR and the fact that at some clubs, Hooton Park, for example, I was at Hooton Park last week. We're going to be there testing some equipment, not this weekend, next weekend, I think, filming the cadet races, I think, to test the equipment. If you take Hooton Park, for example, 120 or so for IKR and around about 85, 90 MSA. And you ask people why you're doing IKR and not MSA, and it tends to be that they don't want all the hassle with the rules and regulations. They don't have to spend so much money on acquiring a licence and so on and so forth. What's your view on where the sport is? Because we obviously come from a time when it was basically MSA. And I will say, guys, those of you that don't know my history, it can be argued, because of the amount of money I spent at the time, that when I ran the MSA series, Motors TV series, it was initially an event held at Three Sisters as part of the club meeting on a Saturday. That was when it was MSA. The MSA then refused to give me a permit to run it as an MSA championship event the following year, so I did it as a non-MSA series. Now, it's fair to say that there was all sorts of things going on around it, people trying to stop it going ahead, and I spent a lot of money at the time, and the case law, because the MSA were posting little things on their website saying, you know, if you raced in a non-MSA event, you lose your MSA licence. The case law is the WPBSA versus Stephen Hendry, when the World Professional Billiards and Snooker Association tried to stop the snooker players going to China to play an event there for more money than, I think, more prize money than there was in the World Championships at the time. So WPBSA tried to stop them doing it, saying they would lose their licence. Same thing that was going on back in the old Motors TV days. And the players put up Stephen Hendry to argue the case, and Stephen Hendry won the case, basically, which is why you cannot, as an organisation, say, well, if you go and play with them, we're going to take your bat and ball away and we're going to take your licence off you and you can't play with us now anymore. And that is so that was probably the first real sort of challenge, if you like, to the MSA. And I will say this, I'm all in favour of the MSA. I think they've got some issues, but I do think a strong MSA is good for the sport, and MSA events are good for the sport, so I will say that. But a lot of the IKR comes out of the fact that people back before the Motors TV series, certainly clubs, would not even think about doing an IKR event, say at Fallbeck, for example, where it was an MSA club. They would never have thought about that before the Motors TV series. After the Motors TV series,
fear?
Sorry,
was some of that fear of repercussion before? Yes.
Well, it's because they would have been told at the time. Well, if you do that, we'll take your permit off you, so you won't run MSA events at your circuit. Now, of course, people realise they can't do that. You can't do anything about it. So, you know, it could be argued that I'm probably the reason, certainly one of the reasons behind the rise of independent kart race meetings in the UK. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, as Chris says. You know, if it gets people in, I spoke to Colin when he was the chairman of the ABKC a couple of years ago. Where was that? That was at Rissington, I think. He was saying that in terms of the numbers of people in karting, we've still got pretty much the same, but there's much fewer numbers in MSA karting. And I've already spoken about this last week with John, so I won't go into it again about what I think needs to be done, but certainly I think the MSA do need to have a plan to double the numbers in karting, because we need to get those numbers back. We've got clubs like Wombwell, for example, fantastic clubs that are really struggling with numbers. And even Three Sisters. I mean, we raced there, when we did the Motors TV series and the MSA series, the average that year was 243 entries.
I think a lot of clubs, Alan, depend on visiting championships.
Yeah.
So they have their club 10, 11 rounds, and then they invite different championships, whether it be Super 1, NKF, NKRA. They need these people to go and race at their weekends to boost the numbers, and without those, I think you're right. I think a lot of clubs will really struggle if they're just trying to do MSA racing.
Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, I think Three Sisters has been down as low as 65, 75, which is incredible when you think that. I mean, it would have been easily
200 plus,
180 would have been a sort of a quiet meeting at Three Sisters years ago, and
absolutely
75 people at Three Sisters, which is a fantastic track. I mean, for me, it's one of the best tracks in the country. Loads of overtaking, which is what you want. But yeah, I think that is a bit of an issue. But IKR, what's your view on IKR?
I've got no issues whatsoever with IKR. I agree with you. Take it one step further back. People go to the local indoor track.
Yeah.
They go there. They have a go on the karts. They enjoy it. They get quite good.
Yeah.
Is the next stage then to go to a club? And I think Houghton is a fantastic club for involving people, initially getting people in with some used equipment. There's people there that will help you. You do a bit of IKR karting. Do you then get to a point where you think, I'm pretty good at this? The next stage now, let's go and see how I compete at MSA racing.
Yeah.
So I don't see them in competition necessarily with each other. I think they can complement each other, to be honest.
It's interesting at Houghton Park as well. The way Bob runs that there is if you're in IKR and want to move up to MSA racing, and that's how they view it, sort of moving up a level.
Yes, yeah.
They don't then allow you
to move back
to compete in the IKR at the same time, which is quite an interesting. I know not all clubs do that. No. You can do both, but at Houghton Park there, Bob, that's Bob's thing. If you want to do MSA, move up, take your ARCs. He does the ARCs test there, of course, but then you can't then just go trophy hunting if you like when you get that extra experience at MSA.
I think it's good. I do genuinely think there's a place for it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Gary Meakin, and I know that's how you pronounce your name, Gary, because you told me the other day. Unable to watch live, we'll wait until it's on YouTube. Oh, unfortunate for you then, Gary. Lee J. Morton, the 10-second penalty has to remain. If you're allowed to appeal it, then you've instantly rendered useless the reason for bringing it in. I was sceptical when it came in, but having raced with it for a year, I'm in favour of it. And I think, I mean, there was a lot of naysayers on the internet, on the karting website, who thought it was a bad thing when it was coming in. I thought it was just going to be a good thing, and actually I think it has been a positive. Do you?
I think it has, and certainly at club level, we've seen less people being penalised for the front nose cones being out of place. So they've either got better at making them stay in place, or there's not as much contact.
Right.
Now, to be fair, from what you see on the circuit, there's certainly not as many karts coming off. I regularly do Wilton Mill. Every meeting, every race, we used to see karts off on turn 1, turn 2. Do we get the odd one? Yeah. Do we get anything like the number we did? No. Yeah. You can see karts, every kart get round.
And so I think, is that the reason why at Super 1 we had standing starts, and we've gone back to rolling starts in most of the classes? And I think that's the reason, isn't it? Because of the success of the bumpers.
We tried standing starts, and although it had some success, we also, as you know, had issues with clutches seizing and people creeping, and so with other different issues. But it was a step forward. Yeah. And then when the bumpers have come back in, we've immediately gone back to rolling starts. And I have to say, last year it was a success for us.
Yeah. Okay. Lee J. Morn says, can I put a quick shout out for Clandale this year? New committee on board, the Celtic Challenge with prizes as a first meeting in March. That's a great event, guys, by the way. The C Plate down there at Clandale. Improvements in the facilities are in the pipeline at Handout. It'd be nice to see as well.
Off Clark there, we've been there with Super
Yeah.
One.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely track,
Yeah,
great people. So yeah, support it.
Yeah, I do like the people down there, to be honest. It's a really friendly place. A bit like Wormwell, I said earlier, South Yorkshire, great little club.
I mean, you are aware, Alan, are you, that this year's Super One are going to use the CIK penalty system, where, unlike previous years where, as clerks, we've handled the judicials, they're actually now using it where the stewards, there'll be a panel of stewards, so the stewards will actually look at all judicials on the day.
Oh, right.
So the clerk of the course will be running with his team of clerks, will be running the circuit, making sure that things are happening right on the circuit. Reports then from the circuit will go into the stewards of the meeting, and they will then conduct the hearing, and following the hearing, if they decide to issue a penalty, it will be done directly from the stewards. This is also happening at many clubs. Wilton Mill, for example, have adopted it this year, so it'll be CIK. I know PF have. I know I'm going as steward in 2 weeks' time to Rowra, and they're using the CIK system at Rowra.
Right, so you as a clerk of the course then won't be issuing the penalties in future at Super One?
No, what will happen is we will have one clerk who's got to be a qualified licensed clerk, will sit on the panel of stewards.
Right.
The senior steward will be appointed directly from the MSA, as currently the MSA appoint the steward, and then the club will have another steward they'll appoint a third steward, and that third steward doesn't necessarily have to be a licensed clerk, but would be expected to have a good understanding of the sport.
Right, okay. Michael Whitten, hi Michael. Hear that they are not allowing stickers on front nose cone due to some being cut, soften under the stickers. I don't know what difference that would make.
I think what the suggestion is that if you've got some compound, some softening between the sticker and the pumper, it's
or a
bit
hole.
like a foam.
Or a
does
hole.
does it cushion it? Does it allow? So I honestly don't know. I've not seen that.
Not allowing stickers on the front nose cone. I can't see that being the case, Michael, to be honest. It remains to be seen. John Hoyle will tell you more, but I think the sponsors will want to see their stickers on the fronts of the cart, so especially at Super One anyway, so I can't see that being the case. And carts these days, it's all about presentation and how they look, so I can't see a Tony cart wanting to present a Tony cart without the Tony cart stickers on the front nose cone. So I can't see that being the case. Chris Williams, December cadet class at Clay, we had 32 IKR. Yeah, and again, that's the sort of introduction level.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
really
it is. Jamie Crease, hi Jamie. Drop down noses would have worked well in the Motors TV series, reverse grids and all. I'm not sure we had that many issues, to be honest, in the Motors TV series, Jamie. You did it, of course, so you might know better than me, although I don't remember. I mean, people thought when we did a reverse grid in Motors TV initially, they thought it would be absolute carnage on a grid of 32.
It worked.
But it worked well, because you've got to get from the back, if you're the championship leader, you've got to get from the back to the front. You can't afford to get involved in incidents. No. We saw some fantastic racing and some fantastic drives, to be fair. Danny Cleverly, the people in IKR are very friendly versus those at some of the MSA clubs. I don't mean all, but some from the MSA look down on the quality of IKR racing. You saying that, Danny, reminds me of how people used to, you'll remember this, on the karting website, how people used to look down on Honda Cadet.
Absolutely.
I mean, some of the comments about Honda Cadet.
I agree.
And some of the best drivers, and we're seeing it now, of course, and you don't hear about it now. Nobody talks down Honda Cadet anymore because they realise that there's some fantastic drivers come out of Honda Cadet.
Absolutely.
We've had drivers even years ago out of Honda Cadet become world champion in the Rotax classes.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that sort of reminds me of what was going on back there, Danny. You probably won't remember that. Julie Massarella says, how are the OK engines working out in terms of equality between engines to date? It looks pretty good. I'm not sure whether...
Well, we had the OK at Wilton, we've had the OK, I was at PF last weekend, some very good close racing. I haven't seen any issues and I haven't heard any negative comments off the drivers back in the paddock.
When I heard that OK was coming in, I did say to John Hoyle that I think it's just going to be another JICA KF3, a class for people with huge budgets. John was saying, I mean, I wasn't convinced there was going to be more than, 15, 16 drivers in the classes. I'm not sure yet, to be honest. It was looking like I was going to be wrong last year during a couple of events that Super One did. But I'm not sure what the current numbers are. I think in junior we are still looking for people to come in, and I think they will, because it does look a pretty good class, as you say.
John never tells me, Alan, because if he told me the numbers, we might ask for a pay rise. So yeah,
that's
John,
true, yeah.
I don't find out till round one what the numbers are.
He was 100 up on this same time last week.
That's fantastic.
Or 99
that's
up,
good.
and we've got some fantastic numbers. So, well, that's all the questions for the time being, guys. If you've got any more questions, then fire them into us. In terms of the sport as a whole, what would you say, where are we in terms of the sport? I mean, obviously we've got issues with MSA licence holder numbers. I've said in the programme last week and in the conversations I've had with the MSA, we need to double the numbers, and they need to have a plan to double the numbers, and I'm not sure they have got a plan to double the numbers. But certainly, as John was saying last week in Super One, he's not only got, I mean, at one time when we were racing, it would have been around 6,500 MSA licence holders. I think we're down to sort of half that number at the moment. And John's got a pool of National A only, which is about 1,200. And it looks like we're going to end up with something like 400 plus registered. So he's got about a third of those. And people talk about Super One being, not what it was, and, we haven't got the numbers in it, for example. But that's, to a large extent, down to the actual numbers of MSA licence holders, because you can't do Super One if you're in IKR, can you?
You can't, and to be honest with you, and I smile, I can remember when we first started in karting many years ago, people used to tell me how it used to be and how much better.
True.
And now I find myself having conversations about how it was when we first started. And I think to a degree that's just life. That people always remember them as good old days, but were they?
Yeah, I was talking to an old Super One champion at I think it was at Hooton Park actually last year, and he was saying that it's not what it was and the quality is not what it was. But I have to say I disagree, because if anyone thinks that Harry Thompson, as an example, wouldn't have been challenging to win the Super One title 10, 15, 20 years ago, I think they're kidding themselves. I think a good driver today.
I think the start.
I mean,
people talk about the money and what the parents and the teams, but from cadet upwards, I watch them and they're fantastic. I mean, they can drive, they can handle the karts. There's some super drivers out there, and there's some super racing. There really is. Yeah.
What did you make of the Channel 4 documentary? Did you see it?
Is this the one with with Ollie Dodds and?
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
Right.
No, I didn't. I heard comments after. I didn't watch it.
What feedback have you had about it?
I think the biggest feedback, I think people saw it as at work really, who are not into the sport. I think people saw it as like a lot of people throw in a lot of money at the children, but you watch something on television like Dance Mums or the horse racing, the show jumping, whatever, and I think because we're involved with karting, we turn down at the weekend and we think everybody on the motorhome with a motorhome and on the motorway, we think they're all into karting.
Yeah.
But we've done the karting for the last God knows how many years, but there's people who go out on motorbikes, quad bikes, boating, skiing, and that's their thing. So you know,
Yeah.
it's good.
Okay. Lionel Puddle. When will the Super One programme and others start shining light on smaller teams and drivers? I'm not quite sure what you mean, the Super One programme. So I'm assuming you're talking about the TV production side of it. It's simple, really. We tend to concentrate on those that are either at the front end in certain classes. The other thing we're looking for is a good backstory. So, you know, I often get people saying, you know, can you interview my son? Okay, I always say, what's his backstory? Because he may be somebody that's not made an A final at the moment. I've literally been asked to interview people's kids, and they may not have even made an A final at that point in the season, maybe 2 rounds in. And a backstory would be, for example, if you'd survived a life-threatening illness and you made a comeback. You know, Alex Lloyd's story last year after fullback was quite an interesting story when he came back at PF. We never actually interviewed him, but you know, that's a really good backstory after what happened to him at fullback. He made an incredible comeback there. So there has to be a backstory. If we're going to be interviewing people, that tends to be the case. We've interviewed people in big teams, we've interviewed people in smaller teams. It just depends. There's no sort of necessarily rhyme or reason for it. I do think quite carefully, though, when I'm leading into a meeting, coming up to a meeting, I tend to go with a film plan. My colleague who's producing the show will tell you that we always have a plan. People that we're going to interview, what we're going to interview them about, why we're interviewing them. And bear in mind, we've not got massive amounts of time in the programmes because there's 6 or 8 12-minute parts. If the race is 12 minutes plus a lap, and then you've got graphics and you've got an interview, and the interview maybe lasts 3 minutes, that's cutting into the racing. I know John Hoyle will tell you that he would prefer a magazine-style programme, you know, something like this with some racing in. You know, if it was 12 minutes, John would probably prefer 9 minutes of talking about karting and 3 minutes of a race, because he's not bothered about seeing karts go round and round and round. I always point out to John, though, if you're at the head of the field winning races, you want to see your race on TV in as full as you possibly can. That's just the nature of programmes. We make race programmes, and Motors TV want to see racing. They want less talking heads, if you like, and more races on screen. So that tends to be how we produce the programmes. I tend to try and concentrate more on production value in terms of the drone, for example. When we brought that in, that was a huge leap forward for the sport and the TV production, and continues to be. Although, of course, with the new MSA rules, we've got somebody contacted me the other week and said he'd watched Landau last year, and there was no drone. Why was there no drone? There was a drone there the previous year, and the previous year it was probably some of the best drone footage we'd ever had. We were flying up and down in the middle of over the tyres. Of course, the MSA have brought in this new rule, which is outside what the Civil Aviation Authority rules are, which basically are if the talent, which in our case the drivers and the officials agree for us to fly closer than 50 metres, for example, then you can do that. The talent have to agree. If one person disagrees, then you wouldn't fly closer than that during their race, potentially. But of course the MSA brought in this rule, which is now ruling out for us Landau. We cannot fly at Landau because we can't fly inside the circuit because we haven't got the space. We can't fly this side because there's a road. We can't fly over a public road. This side there's a road. This side there's a caravan park, and on this side there's the paddock. So basically at Llandau we cannot
Can't
fly at MSA events. We do non-MSA events, and for the Mini Bikes Championship we do there. And even your Clerk at Wilton Mill, even at Wilton Mill, I cannot fly there because I've got nowhere pretty much to take off. Take off and come in and land. And you've got a shooting gallery over the sort of far side of the straight, so you don't want to be up there and having some idiot sort of
shoot you
having
down.
a pot shot on the drone. I'm not saying they would, but you know there are some idiots about. To be fair, so circuits like even Wilton Mill we can't fly, which is a shame for me because it has. There's no doubt. I mean, when the chairman of the MSA comes to you and says, "Footage of the MSA, that drone footage is absolutely amazing," which was a few years ago. Next time I see him, I'll probably say
remind him.
Yeah, remember that when you said it was amazing. Yeah, your rules now mean we can't fly. So anyway, that's that. John Hoyle. John Hall says he does like karts going round and round, but likes points of interest too. Okay. Lee J. Maund. I think the rise in popularity of IKR, F100 and other series shows where the MSA need to focus or possibly deregulate. 5% of the current MSA licence holders race in the Armed Forces two-stroke and Honda Endurance Series. Both are fiercely competitive grids, but with a massive social and friendly aspect to it. It's what MSA karting is missing. Maybe the MSA should just concentrate on national championships and leave club racing to the clubs. I think the problem would then be to race in a national championship, you've got to have an MSA licence, so you know that's why you come through the clubs generally.
I think that would be a backward move personally.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah, I'd just like to see the MSA focusing on doubling the numbers, to be fair. Dave Hughes, how many times in the last 10 years have privateer drivers won Super 1 championships? Matt Davis won X30 2016. Who's the winner in TCAM? Matt England won. He was Dan Ladd, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Little bit support from Alan Turney, but the interesting thing in the TCAM classes is that you know Alan Turney doesn't have an awning, and Alan Turney will help anybody in TKM. So although you know he does give a bit of support to the likes of Abby Pulling and some others, he actually supports anybody. If you've got a problem in TKM, extreme or junior, and you go to Alan, he will help you out. So I mean, a lot of the lads in and lasses in TKM, and they're going to be great classes this year, of course. Again, are pretty much dad and daughter teams. Where else? Chris Williams. If any guys are travelling to Llandau over the Severn Bridge, if you say a code word, you get in for free. Code word is... Oh, he doesn't tell us what the code word is. Ollie Westaver said that's a shame. Footage from Llandau a few years back was awesome, and you're right, Ollie. I thought the year we flew the drone there, I thought it was the best drone footage we had. It was quite amazing. Lee J. Maughan, sadly, the flying of drones seems to be risk avoidance by the MSA rather than risk management. Yeah, well, I would agree because the CAA have specific rules in place for somebody like me, and the rules are if the talent agree, and that can be an actor or in this case drivers, they agree for the drone to fly closer than it typically might do. And bear in mind that you know I moved to the sort of smaller drone a few years ago. Yep. Because the other one that I had was a bigger unit, but there was always some sort of annoying things, little fiddly things going wrong with it. Since I moved to this one, it's a smaller drone anyway, so your risk is that much less than a big a drone coming down on the middle of the track or something. Yep. But yeah, I mean, if the talent agrees for it to fly closer to them, I think as long as you're not getting too close and getting in the eye line.
People say never, but I've watched a drone fly a number of these circuits over the last few years. Never had an issue, never had a complaint from a competitor or anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there couldn't be.
No, I say never say never, but
yeah, I mean the software. You may have seen some of the videos I've made about the drone, and the software is very, very clever. if it loses a signal, if you lost a signal going back 15 years on a radio controlled plane or helicopter, it will just crash. Now if it loses a signal, it realises it's lost a signal, goes up to 100 feet or whatever height I tell it to go up to, program it into the software, it will go up to 100 feet, fly back to where it took off, and land, and it lands typically plus or minus 2 metres from where it took off. And we've actually done that. We did that in one of the Super One programmes, which Martin was filming, and you know, I actually turned the transmitter off completely
to test it.
It went up, it came back, and it landed about 2 feet away from where we took off. Anyway, guys, it's just gone 8 o'clock. We're trying to keep these shows to an hour. So thanks for coming, Ken.
Thanks for inviting me.
All your input. Hopefully you guys have found it really interesting. And you know, if you're at Super One this year racing for the first time, do go over and have a chat with Ken.
Absolutely.
I've known Ken for a long time. I'm not saying that just because he's here. He's an absolute straight shooter, genuine guy. We'll call it as it is. Not going to have any favourites, but do go over and say hi to him. Come and say hi to me as well if you're at Super One this year. That's all for this week. In 2 weeks' time, hopefully I'll be feeling a bit better then, and I won't sound so weird. I've got Nigel Edwards on. I think we're bringing him in on Skype from his home, and we're going to be talking about the new 5-point plan that the ABKC have got in place. Nigel, of course, the new acting chairman of the ABKC and chairman of Trent Valley as well. Been in the sport a long time. He's got a lot of interesting views about the sport. That's going to be an interesting one. It's in 2 weeks. Thursday, I think it's, what are we now, 2nd, so it's what, 9th? I think it's the 16th of March, 7 o'clock. So join us then. Until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.